I'm J.R. Roberts, and I'm the president of the Plaza Theater Foundation in Palm Springs, and you're listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. Nowhere in the world celebrates modernism better than Modernism Week in Palm Springs, California. Every February, this 11-day architecture and design festival hosts exciting architecture documentary premieres, eye-popping house parties, modernist house tours, insightful lectures, designer shopping, detailed exhibitions, and much more. And for almost 10 years, U.S. Modernist Radio has been your gateway, reporting from the U.S. Modernist Compound, aka poolside at the hip Hotel Skylark, interviewing guests from architecture and design, plus special guests right here in the studio. I'm Tom Guild. If you're into mid-century modernism, Modernism Week in Palm Springs is the epicenter of the architecture we love. Want to go with U.S. Modernist in February 2025 and stay at the U.S. Modernist Compound? Email George at usmodernist.org. We've had many shows in the past on the great mid-century architects of Palm Springs. People like Chambers, Clark, Cody, Frey, Krisel, Sackley, Wexler, White, Williams, and the last man standing, Hugh Kaptur. You can see all their houses at usmodernist.org/masters. But that was the 20th century, and in case you hadn't heard, we're now in the 21st century. In fact, we're pretty near mid-century in the 21st. So today, you'll hear from two of today's Palm Springs architects, Michael Kiner and Mark Daniels. They create houses that modernist fans will be fondly touring and doing podcasts about 30 years from now. Leading that tour in 2054, apparently cryogenically frozen, it's Mr. Modernism, George Smart.
Thanks, Tom. Let's see. The year 2054, add 100, subtract 7. Yep, I'll be mid-90s on that tour. By then, the Middle East will have settled down. Taylor Swift will have bought Amazon. And if we're lucky, we'll have first contact with another species. Now, right now, in 2024, those alien visitors all know that Earth is the messed up planet. Earth is like your cousin Pam, who is super nice to your mom but has 4 kids from 3 dads, regularly steals from the 7-Eleven, and thinks vaccines have tracking chips, which of course is the only explanation for her frequent arrests at the 7-Eleven. Now, out in space, there's a big sign on the other side of Saturn that says, in 746 million miles, stay away from the third planet. No intelligent species should land here now, and who could blame them? But in 2054, I hope they land in the desert near Palm Springs in time for the U.S. Modernist afternoon tour, right before happy hour. In fact, if you're listening out there in Zeta Reticuli, I'll get you all some free tickets.
Whoa.
U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by June Goldfinger and Jeff Taylor, sponsors of Circle, Square, Triangle, a traveling exhibition on the architecture of Myron Goldfinger, and by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Palm Springs, Toronto, Los Angeles, and Malibu.
Lifelong desert resident and avid baseball fan Michael Kiner went to UCLA.
Go Bruins.
And obtained his master's in architecture at SciArc.
Go Ray Cappy.
Okay, he started his own firm in Palm Springs in 1990, and he's been making great modernist houses ever since. From poolside at the U.S. Modernist Compound, here's George with architect Michael Kiner.
You come from a sports family.
I do. I definitely do. My father, Ralph Kiner, was a baseball player, very good baseball player. He's in the Baseball Hall of Fame. And my mother, Nancy Chafee, was a national tennis champion. They both grew up in Southern California. My dad grew up in Alhambra, which is on the east side of Los Angeles, and my mother was from Ventura, which is a coastal city between Camarillo and Santa Barbara. And they met through sports. Actually, they met on a radio show that was hosted by Tom Harmon, who was the great football player at Michigan and whose son Mark Harmon is quite an accomplished television actor. But they met on a radio show and they got married in 1951. And actually in 1951 was when they moved down here to what's now Thunderbird Country Club in a house that was designed by Stuart Williams.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, so that was the house I grew up in, which I was fortunate enough to get to know Mr. Williams. And early in my career, I used to kid him and say, you know, you're the reason that I wanted to become an architect because I so much loved growing up in the house that you designed.
But you played sports as well, didn't you?
I did. I went to UCLA on a baseball scholarship, played there for 3 years, and then actually played minor league baseball for a year. I was always interested, or I thought I would be interested in urban planning. And I had majored in sociology at UCLA, and a girl that I was dating at the time sent me an article from the Los Angeles Times about this new architecture school by the name of the Southern California Institute of Architecture, SciArc. And they had a special program that if you had an undergraduate degree, you could receive a master's in architecture in 3 years. It was a pass-fail school, and I thought, you know, I can pass anything. So
Yeah.
I gave it a shot. I came back. I had gotten released from the minor leagues and started architecture school in Los Angeles about 1976 at SciArc, which at the time was down on Berkeley Street, a small little warehouse in Santa Monica with Ray Cappy as the director and a lot of very well-known architects who were the professors there, and it was quite an amazing experience for me.
It was like the Hogwarts of architecture, really.
It definitely was. It was this old warehouse, and some of the students were sleeping underneath their drafting tables, and I needed to make money, so I took a job driving a taxi cab at night in Los Angeles and going to SciArc during the day, and it couldn't have been more opposite than being at UCLA and playing baseball, but I loved it, and that was the beginning of my interest or my career in architecture.
Have you run into any other sports architects, like professional sports players who became architects? Because you're the first one I've ever heard in this category.
That's a good question because, as many people probably know, architecture is a pretty intensive major in college, and it's usually a 5-year degree. The only architect that was a minor league baseball player that I've ever known actually practices here in the desert. His name is Dave Prest.
Okay.
Prest Vuksik was the name of the firm, and Dave studied architecture at the University of Arizona, and he actually was doing it while he was playing baseball, which I wasn't doing, and I was so admired him because it took so much time.
Now, you design houses all throughout California, and they're really beautiful.
Thank you.
The first question I want to ask you is, what's different between the houses you're designing today and the mid-century houses that people are so crazy about here in Palm Springs?
I think that's an interesting question. The first really important element that's different is the technology is so different now. And at least growing up here in the desert, I was fortunate enough to be in a lot of houses designed by locally famous architects from Los Angeles. And a lot of those houses were relatively utilitarian houses at the time. Not very expensive to build. Construction materials were pretty consistent. And now those same interpretations of that mid-century modern are quite expensive with a lot of modern technology. Although what's interesting is the site orientation is very consistent. I mean, I think the focus on the views, the use of glass, ceilings are much higher now than they were then. And I've thought about this, and it might just be because, you know, a lot of the early houses didn't have air conditioning.
Right.
So they weren't utilized as much during the summer. And, you know, the large, expansive glass surfaces would cause the house to heat up more. In fact, the house that we grew up in, I don't think it had air conditioning originally. I think there was evaporative cooling, or swamp cooling as we referred to it then, which worked great when it was hot and dry, but not so well when it was humid.
And in Los Angeles now, it's hard to find new, smaller houses. The ones that they build tend to be much larger and more expensive, not as in the heyday when people were okay with 1,400 square feet in their little jewel box house.
I think that's true, but at the same time, with the housing crisis that exists in California, I think one of the big arguments is to change the zoning to allow for smaller, even much smaller houses as a means to increase density and just livability. Also, the cost to build is so expensive now. So the smaller the house, in theory, the less expensive it's going to be.
So what is cost per square foot building now? Like 500, 600 on average?
Well, I mean, most of my work is here in the desert, and most of it is what I would refer to as custom residential.
Yeah, it's very specialized.
Right. So it's a pretty high-end product, and I would say that's pretty accurate, $500 to $600 a square foot.
Okay.
I remember when I first started, it was a few years ago, $100 a square foot seemed to be, the top of the stratosphere.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, I don't even think they're building tract housing for anywhere close to that these days.
No, must have been in the 90s or so.
Even before
a while
then.
back, yeah.
I mean, we were fortunate enough. We built our own house, my wife Maria and I, in about 20 years ago. And I probably pulled every favor known to man, and I think we were probably around $175 a square foot.
Okay. Well, I know that one of the messages we try to impart to people is that if you want a modernist house, it doesn't have to be blinged out like you might see on the cover of Architectural Digest. And one of the great things about modern design is it's so flexible in terms of scale and structure and size that you can get a house that might be smaller than you imagine that you need, but gives you everything that you need. And that's part of the value of getting an architect.
Well, thank you. I would agree. And, you can have an incredibly functional small space that is very comfortable to live in. I've designed houses that are so large that sometimes you wonder just how much of it is actually going to be used. And I think it's much more efficient and much more successful if you design a residence that is actually used. All of it is used all the time. And you bring up an interesting point about modern architecture, and I think the Palm Springs modern, which was a lot of it was built in the 50s and the 60s, the building codes have changed so much now. I mean, from a structural design standpoint. And so these large panes of glass, which you can still be done, but they can't be done with wood framing anymore. So they're being done with steel construction, what we call big moment frames, which concrete grade beams, steel posts and beams, and the materials also add a lot to the cost of construction.
Sure. But they're more fire resistant, safer, stronger. I mean, that's what you get in the trade-off, right?
They are, and you get an incredible house, but you can't do it for $100 a square foot anymore.
Right. With your prospective clients, what do you wish they would do differently when they come to you and talk to you the first time? Like, how could I, as a prospective client, be a better client for you? What would I need to do coming into your office for that first meeting? You would go, wow, this is great.
Well, I can tell just by talking to you for a few minutes that I wouldn't have a problem with you expressing yourself as to what you would really want out of a design. But I think that's important to really think about what it is that you want to achieve from the project. I would love it if more of my clients were more in tune to sustainability, alternative energy, carbon footprint, because that's another issue with these large houses. And then, here in the desert, which isn't that old, we're doing projects where houses are being demolished that are less than 50 years old. In certain parts of the country, that would be outrageous.
Well, I would think that would be outrageous here too, but I guess it just depends on how much neighborhood resistance you have, right?
Well, that, and also I think that the architectural style. I mean, I can remember many years ago sitting reading the New York Times about Neutra's Maslin House being demolished at Tanaris Country Club. And I can remember playing tennis on that court because my mother was a tennis pro and she used to give lessons on that court. And the fact that it could be demolished just by walking in and pulling a demo permit on a house of that architectural importance was just incredible to me. And I know that probably was the beginning of the backlash towards at least architectural preservation. Palm Springs itself has always been probably the forerunner in the desert, but other cities now are starting to realize how important architectural significant projects are.
It's really incredible in some areas how you'll have a house like there's a Breuer house in Lawrence, New York, that a couple of years ago, a couple bought it in fine condition, needed a little work, but like beautifully preserved, and wiped it out.
Yeah,
And now there's a tennis court there. They built a tennis court
right,
on top of it.
right.
And you have to kind of scratch your head, like if you wanted a tennis court, couldn't you have just bought a tennis court or bought a house where you could build the land next to it? But the answer that keeps coming back is that people who don't know what they're buying necessarily buy it for the location or maybe the value and just want to do whatever they want to do with it.
Well, the follow-up to that is regarding the Maslin house again is that the gentleman that bought the house, that demolished the house, didn't even build a house.
Really?
He sold the lot to somebody else. And so that absolutely precluded the possibility that the next buyer might want to renovate a Neuter house instead.
I wonder why somebody would do that.
It goes back to your question earlier about how to prepare before you come into
Yeah,
a meeting.
yeah.
Maybe you should have had a plan before you demolish a house of that architectural significance.
Sure. I noticed from news coverage in Los Angeles that these enormous houses have been built lately. Some of them with 7, 9, 10 bedrooms, 15 bathrooms. And it sort of strikes me that, in a sense, you're not really building a house, you're building a small hotel. Do you find that once these houses get built, I mean, what comes in? Is it a celebrity with their entourage? I mean, what fills the rooms during the time that people use it?
Well, some of the houses that you're referring to are so big that, they do look like clubhouses for country clubs. I mean, way past the point of really being a necessity. And some of them are so poorly designed, they're grossly unattractive. They're in neighborhoods, they're completely out of scale. It amazes me that there's not some type of architectural review that would at least preclude that from happening. Again, the entire house is really never used. It's just, I think it's more of an ego thing as to why, I want the $75 million property, but how many people are even in a position to pay that kind of money for a house like that? Fortunately, down here in the Coachella Valley, I mean, there are some very large houses, but nothing to that scale. That's what's been happening in Los Angeles. I was just thinking, you don't necessarily equate scale to price, but I mean, probably the most expensive house that's sold in a while is the one that Beyonce and Jay-Z bought in Malibu. Mm-hmm. The house
that was a Paul McLean house, I think.
No, I think it was I forget the Japanese architect.
Ando.
Yes, Ando. The Ando house that was the concrete and glass house in Malibu.
Yes.
But that's a world-renowned architect building a property, but that's not a 25,000 square foot property either. There are those properties, and Ando, I think, is doing a house down here at the...
or Kim Kardashian.
Yes, at the Madison Club, exactly, right. Which is down east end of the valley.
Gated community.
Yes. I think the other one's gated too,
okay.
Although you might be able to walk in from the ocean side. So those are interesting properties, and I think the cost of those is more the construction type. The scale, of course, but just the method of poured-in-place concrete is quite expensive. So,
if a person or a couple wants to build a modest house somewhere, obviously land is very expensive in different places. How far out do they have to go from downtown Los Angeles to find reasonably priced land these days?
Well, I think the key to that is the word reasonably.
Okay.
I mean, I've looked at lots with clients that were in excess of $1 million. Some of them are out in, north of Malibu, but those are in the hills, so you get some views or some serenity there. An infill house on the west side of Los Angeles, most of those are going to be older houses that are torn down and new properties built.
Yeah.
Even here, I've done a couple of them in Indian Wells where we've torn down houses, but they were relatively modest homes that were built probably in the 50s or the 60s as vacation homes, as the new ones will be, but without the modern amenities or even the thought for the site. So Those are still, like $1.5 million just to get started.
Did you find during the last 10 years that people wanted to build houses with rentals in mind, that was part of their strategy to rent it out for part of the year?
I haven't had many clients who have looked at them as rental properties. I have had clients that looked at them as what we would call granny flats, or place for a mother-in-law or a parent to live, so that when they got older that they keep that sort of nuclear family together. Of course, it could also serve as a rental property, and that's the ADUs are becoming much more popular, accessory dwelling units in California. The state has started to mandate the ability to build ADUs. They've relaxed the parking requirements because of the tremendous shortage of housing in California right now.
Yeah, it seems like not just in California but everywhere, the myriad of well-intentioned regulations which have piled on each other over the years then preclude people from fixing problems.
That's a very good point. And also the changes in the building code, the requirements for alternative energy efficient homes, net zero homes. Here in the desert, net zero is really tough because most of your energy is being used in the summertime with air conditioning. So yes, the more legislation, the greater the cost, the more difficult it is maybe to remodel or keep something that's existing.
What are the features that people ask you most frequently about when they're thinking about a new house? What's like the trendy thing right now they want to be sure they have in their house?
Well, I think probably the most prevalent question or comment today is the idea of doing a large open space, a great room with a kitchen, an open kitchen, so that the idea of communal living where everybody is together has become more important. It also works if it's just the two of you, husband and wife, or your kids are, away or older, because you're still sort of in the same space. I mean, exercise rooms or multi-purpose rooms are become quite important, whether they're offices or exercise rooms or emergency bedrooms. So multi-purpose uses of spaces, which goes back to the idea of the great room as well.
Are home movie theaters still a thing?
They are, but it's interesting now because I have two a 21-year-old and a 19-year-old. They're watching things on their iPads too. So yeah. I mean, you're walking around the house with multimedia, little
You've
computers.
Got Dexter on your phone,
exactly.
Right?
So, but I think the media rooms are certainly more popular. A more affordable version of that would be, just a nice surround sound system in a great room.
Sure.
Where like a Sonos system, which is much more affordable than doing an entire great room. So the ability to multitask in spaces, I think, has really become a lot more prevalent today than it was, say, 10 or 15 years ago.
You can learn more about Michael's wonderful houses at michaelkinerassociates.com. That's Kiner. Michael, thank you for coming over.
George, thank you so much. This was fun.
That was George talking with architect Michael Kiner. An elementary school field trip to I.M. Pei's East Wing at the National Gallery of Art inspired another Palm Springs architect, Mark Daniels. He graduated from the University of Hawaii at Manoa.
Go Bows!
And SCI-Arc,
the Hogwarts of architecture.
And he worked for McAuliffe as design director before starting his own firm. With a goal of turning every client into a raving fan, his creative process includes talking to strangers, which only leads to good things. He also agreed to talk with George Smart. Here's George's poolside conversation with architect Mark Daniels.
Mark, I want to go back in time to your elementary school trip to I.M. Pei's East Wing of the National Gallery of Art.
Right.
What was that like for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of architects, they grew up drawing floor plans, playing with Legos and Lincoln Logs, and they knew from age 5 that they wanted to be an architect. That wasn't the case for me. It wasn't until well after architecture school that I realized that exact trip was the foundational moment that led me to architecture. I was 11 years old, and I was in the Virginia suburbs. My dad was a colonel in the Army stationed at the Pentagon. And that was a great age and time to be in D.C. because at that age, you're curious. The exposure to all the art and culture is just mind expanding. And we had this field trip to the National Gallery of Art. And I remember walking in the front doors. I didn't know who I&Pei was. I didn't know what architects did. And I saw the massive red cauldron hanging above. I saw the glass roof form, the sharp edges of the stone, and the catwalks going across the space. And I was mesmerized by it. And those memories are etched into my mind. But it wasn't until, age 24 that I went full circle and realized that was the experience that led me to architecture and have an understanding of architecture.
So it just kind of leapt out of your DNA somewhere? And
a curiosity that was sort of cemented into me. I understood space could have an impact on me from that experience, and I think that led to seeking out other spaces, other designs, continuing that curiosity toward architecture.
I've experienced some of the same thing, although I didn't go into architecture. My dad was an architect. So I would have these kind of mysterious attractions to things growing up and only figured out later it was because of that, right?
Yeah, once you have just an idea, a sense of understanding that space can have an impact on you or your feelings or emotions, then it's sort of game on. Then it's time to go explore. You see a weird building and you want to walk into it, and that's how you learn about architecture. It's not just the history books. It's experiencing the spaces and traveling and exploring.
I know a lot of people understand the effect of space in religious structures, in churches and synagogues, but they don't necessarily get it about other buildings and house types. I mean, how do you impart that to someone that doesn't really have a lot of experience in it yet?
I think most people don't realize that they can have it, and a lot of it's about just getting balanced natural light, getting the volumes correct. It doesn't need to be the most profound piece of architecture for it to be quality architecture. And once people realize that it's these subtle shifts or these subtle elements in a home that take it from good to great, then they themselves realize they too can have it, even if it's a remodel of a suburban house. It's just a little shift, a little move here and there that allows it to breathe and grow and live differently.
When people are coming to you for their houses, do they come with a list of things they've seen on HGTV? Does that happen quite a lot?
It all depends. We've had a broad spectrum of requests. One of my favorite that I share quite a bit is usually we kick off a client meeting, the first client meeting, with a deep dive into programming. What do they want out of the project? What spaces do they need? If it's Thanksgiving, is everybody in the kitchen? Is it just the two of them? Is it catered? So this is our rule book as we go forward. We had a client say no to that. Then we asked them to name their favorite project in the world, architectural project. They said no to that as well.
They say, no, I won't name a project?
Yeah, so they sort of gave us a clean slate, tabula rasa, to do whatever we wanted. But that's scary because it's so open-ended.
Yeah.
And there's no common ground to have a dialogue about that. So that's one extreme. They eventually said they love Wes Anderson films.
Okay.
So we built a concept on that because he has such a distinct style to his films, and the way he directs is so precise with so many rule sets. We use that and applied it to architecture to have a common ground and common understanding with the client. But other times, clients do show up with a sketched out floor plan or a full list of what they want. And that process can be fun. It can be frustrating. It depends on their personality type. But it's all about education, making sure they understand if we propose a change or a shift or an evolution to what they thought was great, we take them along for the ride and they get into our head and understand why we're evolving the project with them. But it's very collaborative all the way through.
I believe you are the guest who has traveled the least amount of distance to come to us. Your office is literally right down the street.
That's right. So we're on the second floor of a building in downtown Palm Springs, and it's definitely walking distance.
When people come to town, how do they find you? How do they know that you're here?
A lot of it's word of mouth. So we have an online presence, we have Instagram, all of that, but friends, personal friends refer us to their friends. Old clients have been the best source of referrals. They're happy and their friends see their project and they want to move to Palm Springs or build or remodel. Contractors, real estate agents, but the best referrals are from people we know and who trust us and whom we trust.
Sure. Now, here at Modernism Week, you gave a talk called Talking to Strangers Only Leads to Good Things, which I thought was one of the best titles of all the talks that were given. So what was that about?
It was basically our design process, and it's all about curiosity and the evolution of thinking, how we begin to start a design concept and take the client on for the ride through the end. So a lot of high-level ideas about referencing art and architecture. One of the stories is for a project here in Old Las Palmas. I met the client at Mass MoCA in North Adams, Massachusetts, which is a great museum, and they have 9 James Turrell installations.
Okay.
So I needed to have a common language, a common experience with him. So I took him to this James Turrell installation in the morning. We walked through it. We discussed it. That afternoon, I presented the design concept for his house, and it was all about layered experience, forced perspective, a lot of the tools James Turrell uses. And that allowed us to have a dialogue higher than this is the kitchen, this is the dining room. And we talked about how Turrell shifts space and manipulates perception of space, and how we were doing that in his work as well. So it was stories like that about the design process, client experience. And there were tidbits of other stories about meeting Gary Johns at Modernism Week. That was a byproduct of a construction fence blowing over in a windstorm, and he stopped to say, hey, this just happened, and that's how we connected with the Modernism Week board.
Okay.
And just little random events where, as a byproduct of chatting with somebody, it leads to something much bigger and greater, and that was the through line.
If you go to the Architecture and Design Museum and you look down, you can see in the Walk of Stars these great architects
Right.
that have been through Palm Springs during the mid-20th century. And I think we have one big one left, Hugh Kaptur,
Right.
who is in his 90s. So how old are you now?
37.
37. So 30, 40 years from now, who's going to be the gang here in Palm Springs we're all looking up to?
Yeah, it's a good question. Palm Springs has evolved quite a bit, and there are a lot of outside architects doing great work here as well.
Yeah.
There are some from Mexico City. There are a lot from LA and San Francisco and New York. So it's more international, and the people that live here reflect that as well. The clients that are building here are not of Palm Springs. They fly in for the winter and spend
Right.
time here. But it's interesting. There's some great architects here. Lance O'Donnell's from the desert originally, and he's created his own brand of mid-century modernism, which reflects the history of what was here, but he adds his take onto how it can live today and be contemporary as well. The landscape architects, surface design out of San Francisco, they do a lot of work down here, and you can tell when you walk into a project they collaborated on. It just lives differently. It's all of the desert. It's water-friendly landscape, but they create these lush gardens, and no matter who the architect is, their work shines, and they really tie the architecture to the mountains and the experience of Palm Springs. So I think they will be celebrated for years to come down here.
How built out is Palm Springs and the valley at this point? Because back in the day, it was just open desert. You come by a square mile and put in your golf course or your tennis courts or your 200 units. How much land is left to do big new things?
Right. There's plenty of land to sprawl, but the prime neighborhoods are the good ones because they're protected from the wind by the mountains, and it's a very condensed area. So neighborhoods like Old Las Palmas or Thunderbird and Rancho Mirage, which were the early ones to be built out, they're essentially all built out. There are a couple lots here and there, but they're usually not for sale. Many clients are buying property, demolishing the whole thing, or doing a major remodel just to get into the right neighborhoods, which is unfortunate because a lot of those structures are great and a lot of them have life in them and can be preserved. We do see that quite a bit. We do see people buying houses just to tear them down to be in the right spot.
Well, the celebration of modernism is, of course, big here with Modernism Week, but how is the preservation movement here, the people that are actually trying to save individual houses from demolition?
It's very strong. Palm Springs has a great preservation community, and the city as well, in the zoning code, has a very strict preservation bylaw. Any project that's older than 50 years of age, if you're demolishing it, it has to go through the preservation board, the historic preservation board. That saves a lot of projects that are worthy of being saved from being demolished. There are plenty of projects that have no architectural significance and no history to them, and those are allowed to be demolished. But anything that was designed by an architect or has a unique character to it, there's a discussion about the pedigree of the project. Is it worth saving? Are there other examples of this? And it's a good educational process, both for the city as a whole, but also for the homeowner, the developer, the architect that are proposing to change these projects.
So does that process with the city, does it just delay demolition or can they actually stop demolition?
Great question. So you need to go through that process before they issue a demolition permit. So
Okay.
it's a bit of pre-work, and it requires a lot of research. When we go through this process, we hire outside consultants to scour the Cal Poly archives and find articles on these projects, or the newspaper archives. And we end up with 50-page documents about the entire lineage of the house, any sort of additions or remodels that happened to it, who lived there when, full title reports, and that informs the discussion about whether this is worthy of preservation or if it's allowed to be demolished.
I know that downtown Palm Springs has had a number of these issues come up over the years. I think Town and Country Shopping Center
Right.
was a big one.
Yep.
And that giant hole that exists in front of the art museum has been there for years. These big projects come in and then they kind of stop, right? So is that a Palm Springs phenomenon here?
You know, it's interesting because that does happen quite a bit, mostly with hotels.
Okay.
I don't know the details. There are a lot of rumors floating around about funding showing up, that dynamic changes. COVID had a big impact on a lot of this. But it seems like there are a lot of players from New York and LA and San Diego, that outside money that comes in, and they're not familiar with the city processes or the requirements about parking and things like that. And that tends to stall the projects, and things evolve because of that. And it's not always evolving in a good way.
Now, you went to SciArc
Correct.
in Los Angeles, and mostly in the past, I've talked with originating faculty or students who went there 50 years ago. So you're my most recent graduate.
Right.
So what is SciArc like today as a school?
Yeah, it's a crazy place, and I mean that in the best possible way. The biggest thing you learn at SciArc is how to design. It doesn't matter if you're designing a teacup or a skyscraper or a city. You learn to solve problems through design, and failure is encouraged. Some of the most celebrated projects are these wild ideas that could not be fully resolved, but the act of pursuing those ideas is what's celebrated. So it's a great place to go to school. It's wonderful. It's a happy memory in my mind.
It's one of the few break-off architecture schools that has ever persisted. Most of them die off after a couple of years. We had one in Virginia near me that maybe lasted 2.5 years before it folded. But I understand that Ray Cappy was an accountant, essentially, in his youth. He did the books for his father's business and was able to keep the place afloat.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Learned something new.
Tell me about the projects that you're working on now. What kinds of things?
We have a lot of fun ones, a mix of remodels and new construction. They're all single-family residences, custom homes, and they all explore unique concepts, everything from the idea of a geode where we crack the site and the architecture open to let it connect to the mountains and the ridgelines beyond and the site in the foreground, to the one I mentioned with James Turrell as the reference, and using his ideas of forced perspective and layered experience to inform an architectural experience and how you proceed through a house. But it's all over the board, and inspiration sometimes arrives from the client. We have one client who handed us the best design concept in the world. Meeting number one, she said, "I want to be dreamily disconcerted as to whether I'm inside or out at all times."
Nice.
Right, I agree. And that led to a lot of really fun discussions about what that means to them and how we can achieve that. And it evolved from there, and we ended up with a really great design that all started from a single square. It's a play out of both Frank Lloyd Wright and Louis Kahn's rule book. Start simple and let the geometry evolve. And we started with a single square and created a series of other squares that reacted to program defined by them and site conditions. And we ended up with this sort of evolved shape with all these in-between spaces inside and out that is going to live very well. That one's meant to start construction in a few months.
I noticed on our trip here this year that across the street from the Skylark Hotel, it looks like they're building public housing.
They are.
And I assume there's a shortage of that here in Palm Springs.
Right. One of the concerns I have with Palm Springs is it's a small footprint, and the prime neighborhoods will always be the prime neighborhoods because of the mountains and the wind patterns. And it has the potential to evolve into becoming like the Hamptons, where it's ultra exclusive. So I think it's great that they're building attainable, affordable housing and higher density, so there is more access to housing in different parts of Palm Springs.
The lot that it's on, I know, has been vacant forever and ever and ever, and it was great to see something going up in there.
Agreed.
Now, has the tiny home movement reached Palm Springs at all?
It has, but in a very limited aspect. There was a neighborhood on the south end of town that pitched these structures as tiny homes, but I don't think they were officially tiny homes where they're portable. It was just a branding mechanism. And I'm not sure why it hasn't taken off more in Palm Springs. It may be a zoning code issue out here, but I don't know more than that.
It's so fascinating to me that if you drive through Palm Springs, you just see kind of the glamour and everything. But if you walk through Palm Springs, one building, which is really nice, like this one, can be next door to something. It's kind of a hovel, right? And then next door to that is something behind the walls. You don't know what it is. It's just such a tapestry of different buildings in different conditions here. Is that from a zoning thing that happened that way?
So there are a couple of parameters. One is just the history of Palm Springs. A lot of the projects from the early 20s are still here. Some have been restored and they're marvelous and magnificent. Others have been falling apart for decades, but they're still here and people still occupy the buildings, still use them, but it's time for a refresh. We also have the layer of fee simple land versus lease land. So Palm Springs, if you imagine a checkerboard stamped onto the ground in 1 square mile increments, it's checkerboard of lease versus fee simple land. And with some of these empty properties in the middle of town, there are lease complications where you may need 10, 15, 20 signees to be able to build on that land because it was passed down from grandma to grandchildren. And that just complicates the...
Is that the tribal land?
It's the tribal land,
Okay.
right? So that complicates the situation as far as ease of access to build.
It's very unusual. I noticed on my phone, when it pulls up the map, there's the Agua Caliente Indian land, and then next door to it, there's a blank square mile,
Right.
and then another one, and then one below that. So it is that checkerboard
Exactly.
kind of thing.
Exactly.
My least favorite building in Palm Springs is the Amtrak train station. Have you been out there?
I have, and it's in the middle of nowhere.
It's a concrete bunker. The bathroom is always locked, and the train comes at 2:30 in the morning.
Right.
Has Palm Springs, do you know, ever tried to get like real rail service going back here?
There's always talk of a direct line into LA or to Phoenix or to Vegas because they're all very accessible.
Yeah.
But it always stops at the headline on the news, in the newspaper, and nothing ever gets traction, which is unfortunate.
I mean, I would think that given Palm Springs' reputation, some enterprising train company would want to be bringing people here, carload after carload, getting off at some elegant train station with all the taxis lined up to take them into town, or celebrities could come in from LA on the train. And it just seems like a natural fit.
I think it's a great opportunity.
I drove out there expecting to find this, and of course found this concrete bunker by the train track.
Right. Yeah, it is Southern California, so the car does reign supreme, and that's definitely true out here. And it's unfortunate because it'd be so easy to get access to LA or the coast via rail, via train.
Last question, Mark. So what building out here would you really like to get your hands on to do a renovation?
Oh, man, that's a great question. There's an Albert Frey building downtown. It was one of his early projects. I think it's from 1935. I don't know the exact name of it, but it's a furniture store at this point. It was a dental office originally.
It's the Coker Sampson building?
That's exactly it. Yes, that building is magical. It is so cool. You see the old Spanish, I'm quoting with my fingers right now, old Spanish buildings on either side. This modern building predates either of those. And it was just there on its own. The bones are so great. It has a beautiful cantilever. The proportions are wonderful. And it needs some love. It can use a restoration. So that would be one that I'd love to work on.
Last I heard, I think there's a second floor Airbnb or something that people
That
can
makes
rent.
sense because there are apartments on the second floor.
Okay. You can learn more about Mark at mwdarch.com. Mark, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. That was great.
That was my conversation with architect Mark Daniels. Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by June Goldfinger and Jeff Taylor, sponsors of Circle, Square, Triangle, a traveling exhibition on the architecture of Myron Goldfinger, and by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Palm Springs, Toronto, Los Angeles, and Malibu. Want to go with us to Modernism Week in February 2025? Email me at george@usmodernist.org. Okay, Tom, it's all yours.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 20,500 significant modernist houses, and access 4.3 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song is performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl, with Kelly Policelli on guest research. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guile. George and I will be back next year with more Roaming Through the Modernism Expo in Palm Springs editions of U.S. Modernist Radio.